7. Jealous boyfriend. Law enforcement in Bogota, Colombia is accusing an American named John Poulos of killing 23-year-old Colombian DJ Valentina Tres Palacios. In the 2019 Colombian Dance Awards, Tres Palacios received the Breakout DJ of the Year award. She was starting to become quite the popular DJ amongst locals, and her future was looking bright. It was determined that the Texas resident Poulos, who fled to Panama after the murder, was trying to escape to Istanbul. The investigation's ongoing, and at this point, Poulos, the victim's boyfriend, is the primary suspect. Authorities in the area are currently holding Poulos responsible for Tres Palacios' murder, thanks to jealousy of her success and many suitors. Tres Palacios' body was placed in a suitcase and buried in the bottom of a trash can. Also, the suspect is said to have thrown Tres Palacios' body in the trunk of his vehicle. This is supported by unsettling footage that was captured of what looks like Poulos. At that point, Valentina was already in the suitcase wrapped up in a towel. According to reports, the pair were considering moving in with each other after being together for only 8 months. But that never happened since Poulos actually lived in the United States with a wife and 3 children. On top of that, he was old enough to be Valentina's father. 6. Disappearance of Matthew Mullaney. In 2003, Matthew Mullaney enrolled at Connecticut's Fairfield University. He left on January 11, 2003 for a semester-long study abroad program in Florence, Italy's Angel Academy of Art. February 1, 2003 was the last time he was ever seen. At the time, he was spending time with his friends at the Lions Fountain, laughing and talking. It was reported that he was not intoxicated when he left at 2:30 a.m. During his travels, Mullaney kept in close contact with his family and friends almost daily through emails and phone calls. According to him, he was working hard on his education and was really enjoying his time in Florence. Because of this, his family was confused when he suddenly stopped reaching out. After that night, Matthew hasn't used his credit card or his prepaid phone cards to make overseas calls. When he disappeared, he was still in possession of his wallet, which had his health insurance card and Massachusetts state driver's license. Interestingly, his passport was left behind with the rest of his things at his apartment. There have been several possible sightings of Matthew across Europe since he officially went missing. Some witnesses claim to have seen him on a train heading from Dover to London, on a ferry from Wales to Dublin, in Galway, Ireland, and in Bologna, Italy. But none of these sightings have been confirmed, and he hasn't been found. Some of the witnesses say that the man who they believe was Matthew looked thin, unkempt, and sick. The Charlie Project is profiling Matthew's story, despite the fact that he vanished in Europe since he's an American citizen. Police in Ireland and the Netherlands are still looking into his disappearance, so Matthew's case is currently open and unsolved. 5. Steven Sodloff. In August 2013, an American journalist named Steven Sodloff was kidnapped in Syria. He was a freelancer who'd written for several major publications, including Time magazine, and had even covered conflicts in the Middle East for years. Mr. Sodloff identified himself as a stand-up philosopher from Miami on his Twitter, which was last used on August 3, 2013. He also mentioned how he loves the Miami Heat basketball team while tweeting about current events in Syria, Libya, Egypt, and Turkey. He frequently concentrated on the human aspect of the overseas crisis, writing in early 2013 about the hardships displaced Syrian citizens face who were battling without food or shelter. In 2012, Mr. Sodloff reported from Libya and recounted the events of the night the American embassy in Benghazi when it was attacked. On September 2, 2014, a video was released by the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, showing the horrific murder of Steven Sodloff. The video was similar to the one released a few weeks before the murder of Sodloff that showed the beheading of American journalist James Foley. This clip showed Sodloff dressing in an orange jumpsuit and kneeling somewhere in the desert. A masked ISIS militant then read a statement condemning the United States and its policies in the Middle East before taking the hostage's life. The killing of Sodloff was widely condemned by leaders around the world who expressed their horror at the brutality of the act. President Barack Obama issued a statement calling the murder a horrific act of violence and vowed to get justice. Sodloff's family also issued a statement saying they were grieving privately and that their son had devoted his life to portraying the suffering of people in war zones and was ultimately martyred for his courage and selflessness. They also thanked those who were working hard to secure his release and urged the world to continue fighting against ISIS. The death of Steven Sodloff, along with several other high-profile attacks by ISIS, brought renewed attention to the threat posed by the terrorist group and the conflict in Syria. It also raised questions about the safety of journalists working overseas and the need for greater protection for those who put themselves at risk to report on important stories. 4. Brittney Griner. Brittney Griner is a center player for the Phoenix Mercury and a two-time gold medalist for Team USA in the Olympics. Since 2015, Griner has spent the WNBA offseason playing basketball with a Russian team called UMMC Ekaterinburg. Around half of the 144 players in the WNBA compete overseas during the state's offseason. Some WNBA players even brought their skills to Russia for the Winter 22 season. Brittney was taken into custody by Russian police on February 17, 2022, after taking a flight from New York to Russia. Authorities launched a criminal investigation after claiming Griner had vapes carrying cannabis oil in her luggage. The 4-week-long Griner trial started in July 2022. According to her testimony, she didn't mean to break the law. The guilty verdict was declared by a Russian judge, and she was given a 9-year Russian prison sentence. In December 2022, after months of rumors, Griner was released by Russia in exchange for Victor Bout, a Russian arms dealer that the US had in custody. According to United States President Joe Biden, the release of Brittney was something they were working toward every day. After she got home to American soil, Griner shared her thoughts by saying, "It feels good to be home," online. What about Paul Whelan is a question many people asked, as some were excited about the release of Brittney. He is another current American prisoner in Russia and a former US Marine. President Biden has promised to keep fighting to bring him home, despite the Kremlin's refusal to release him. Brittney said that she will use her platform to support the administrator during these initiatives. She's concentrating on rejoining the basketball world. Despite the fact that Griner's a free agent, she claims she'll play for Phoenix Mercury when the season starts in May 2023. Brittney returned home after almost a year. Now that she's returned to the US, there are growing discussions on the safety of athletes and repatriating other Americans who've been jailed overseas. 3. Otto Warmbier. Otto Warmbier was an American college student who died in 2017 after being tortured in North Korea for over a year. In 2015, he was accused of stealing a propaganda poster from his hotel during a tour of the country. He was then sentenced to 15 years of hard labor, but his health declined rapidly, and he fell into a coma after his trial. He was released on humanitarian grounds in June 2017, but he died 6 days later in his hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. From the beginning, North Korea stood by their statement of never mistreating Mr. Warmbier in any way. They claimed that he contracted botulism while in prison, but American doctors never found any evidence of this. Otto's mum, on the other hand, feels differently. When she was reunited with her son, he was not the same. He was covered in scars, had broken limbs, a shaved head, and seemed as if he'd broken teeth. Mrs. Warmbier believes her son was tortured, and he was only released because they didn't want him to die on their soil. A medical assessment found no evidence of beatings on Warmbier, despite the fact that he collapsed due to a possible cardiac arrest, which may have caused him to lose blood and oxygen to his brain and put him in a coma. Warmbier's case sparked international condemnations of North Korea's human rights violations. His parents sued the North Korean government for wrongful death and won $501 million in damages, which they've not yet been able to collect. They also criticized former President Donald Trump for siding with Kim Jong-un and absolving him of responsibility for their son. They urged other Americans not to travel to North Korea, calling it a terrorist state. Warmbier was born on December 12, 1994, as the oldest of 3 children. He was a bright and popular student who graduated salutatorian of his high school and attended the University of Virginia for Commerce and Economics. He also did an exchange program at the London School of Economics. He had a passion for travel and wanted to learn about different cultures and people. Warmbier was described as a warm, kind, and curious person who loved life. 2. 4 Americans kidnapped, killed in Mexico. 4 Americans went to Mexico on March 3, 2023 for medical attention, but instead they got caught in a gunfight and were taken hostage by armed men. According to a statement released by the FBI, they were attacked immediately after they got to Matamoros from South Carolina. Matamoros is at the southernmost point of Texas and close to the Gulf Coast. It's reported that they were driving a white minivan with North Carolina plates. Latavia Tay McGee, Shahid Woodard, Eric James Williams, and Zindell Brown were the victims. 2 of them were found dead and 2 were rescued by Mexican authorities 4 days later. According to Tamaulipas' Attorney General, Irving Barrios, there was a misunderstanding and the Americans were not specifically targeted. A source familiar with the case told ABC News that the kidnappers probably assumed the Americans were rival human traffickers. The kidnappers allegedly belonged to the Gulf Cartel, a powerful drug trafficking organization in the region. On March 10, 2023, 5 alleged cartel members were arrested and charged for the aggravated kidnapping and murder. The 2 survivors, Williams and McGee, were found in a wooden house on the outskirts of Matamoros on March 7th. One of the deceased was also located inside the house and the other was found outside. One of them was wearing a surgical robe during the discovery. Williams and McGee are now back in the US and have spoken out about their nightmare. They said they were beaten, tortured, and threatened with death. They also said they prayed and sang gospel songs to keep their hopes up. The victims expressed their gratitude to Mexican authorities for rescuing them and their grief for those who didn't make it. They also warned others not to visit Mexico for cheap medical procedures like they did. 1. Bakari Henderson. In 2017, Bakari Henderson, a 22-year-old American tourist, was killed by a mob in Greece over a selfie with a waitress. He was a college graduate from Texas who traveled to Zakynthos to launch his clothing line, Bakari Luxury Sportswear. He was beaten to death in the street after being chased out of a bar by a local criminal gang. His death sparked international outrage and calls for justice. The original verdicts didn't suit the ferocity of the attack, according to his relatives, who traveled to Greece for the 2 trials. In 2018, 6 men were convicted of grievous assault for Henderson's death, not murder. They received sentences ranging anywhere from 5 to 15 years in prison. A Greek prosecutor appealed the verdict and sought a retrial on murder charges, which could actually carry a life sentence. On February 21, 2022, the original convictions of the 6 men were upheld when a Greek court rejected the request to increase the penalties. 5 of the men who'd already served their prison terms for assault convictions had their sentences left unchanged as a result of the ruling. The court shortened the sentence of the 6th suspect, who'd previously received a harsher punishment. Since their son's passing, Phil and Jill Henderson have been tirelessly seeking justice for him. Along with continuing his clothing business, which Amazon has now taken up, they've also created a foundation in his honor and drawn inspiration from his artwork and journal entries. Thanks for watching. Have you ever traveled abroad? Let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.